You're listening to the Sea of Dragons podcast by XFL Endzone. Well, week one is in the books, and the XFL 2020 is off and running this weekend with fast, exciting, and hard-hitting professional football. And this league is letting the players hit, and the players did not disappoint. Defensive end Stanley Mapunga of the Seattle Dragons delivered one of my very favorite hits of the week against a DC defender that was absolutely fantastic. Offensively, stars began to emerge in every game. PJ Walker, Austin Prohl, Jordan Ta'amu. But the Seattle Dragons had a tough week one challenge, traveling from Washington State all the way to Washington, D.C. against a highly respected preseason favorite in the D.C. Defenders. The Dragons put together a very exciting attack on both sides of the football, but as we know, a couple big mistakes in the secondary, 2 crucial pick sixes, and a block punt for a touchdown. Well, that's difficult for any team to overcome. But now, they are coming home. And CenturyLink just opened up more seating after groundbreaking ticket sales continue to rise. We are so fired up. We'll be sitting in the end zone as the Tampa Bay Vipers face off against a horde of dragons in the tens of thousands. It's going to be loud, and I can't wait to get my first taste of XFL football absolutely live. But before week 2 begins, we have a real treat for you. Episode 4, Dugeness and Dragons, features another new segment where we dive into fantasy football. So kick back for a few and get to know who you should know in XFL Fantasy Football. Welcome to Dugeness and Dragons, our little spin on fantasy football that features many excellent and insightful minds of XFL Fantasy. However, after only a week, we'll be asking our contributors to look deep into their crystal ball as they try to attempt to shed light on the near future of XFL Fantasy. Joining us first in this endeavor is Adam Pelletier, XFL and fantasy writer. How are you doing today, Adam?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. How are you doing today?
Doing well. We're looking to throw you right into the frying pan here to see what you have to cook up, and we'll keep it fairly rapid fire. So let's start with week one's biggest winners of the week. Who are your top 3?
So my 3 biggest winners. Number 1 is going to be Austin Prohl, wide receiver on the Seattle Dragons. He just went off, proved he was more than just someone who has a famous father. You know, his 88 yards and 2 touchdowns is big for people who took a chance on him. Nelson Spruce, wide receiver of the LA Wildcats, one of the few bright spots for the Wildcats this week. He was the XFL's first 100-yard receiver, had 103, and look for him to still be big this week. And really, overall, fantasy degenerates and XFL fans everywhere are the biggest winners because Vince McMahon and Oliver Luck made it so we all can enjoy the game we love, the sport we love, and have something to do. And also shout out to all fantasy sports for allowing us all to participate in season-long leagues that we all know and love so much.
Absolutely. So now let's look at the losers. Who kind of started off on a real low note and your top 3?
Number 1 loser is running backs across the XFL. No one broke 100 yards in the first weekend. Only 2 running backs were over 50 yards. We went into the year thinking running backs would be big in the XFL, and boy, could we not have been more wrong. Only 2 running backs scored in double figures in half-point PPR leagues, and that could be a sign of things to come. Also, loser Jeff Badette. Jeff Badette on Dallas was someone people started to hype up later last week, and he just only had 3 catches for 6 yards. And lastly, Georgia Bulldog Aaron Murray. Rough day, completed under 50% of his passes, looked lost and listless at times. The only reason he didn't throw a few more interceptions is because he threw the ball so far behind the New York Guardians defenders were well past where they thought the ball was going to be. So definitely Aaron Murray taking an L last week.
Yeah, and I'll second that because that was pretty tough to watch. And for Dragon fans listening to the show, we have Tampa coming up for week 2. And I'd kind of like to see him stick with Murray for another week because someone like Flowers concerns me a lot more than Murray. But going back to the running backs, who were those two that popped over that mark?
So the two that got over the 10-point mark were James Butler and Trey Williams, and they both did it on the strength of touchdowns. James Butler, the running back in Houston, really came out of nowhere off the depth chart. Wasn't listed on the depth chart last week at running back. Was listed as a returner, but he ended up leading Houston in touches with 11, and he turned that into 18 fantasy points, courtesy of a receiving touchdown and a rushing touchdown. And also Trey Williams, the third head of the three-headed dragon out there in Seattle, took one of his 4 catches to the house, and he finished with 12.3. Davion Smith and Matt Jones both were over 50 yards. Davion Smith had 79, and Matt Jones had 85. So both of them could keep seeing a heavy workload. But running back looks like it's going to be a scant wasteland, and you're hoping you can find somebody who will either convert after touchdowns or score touchdowns.
Yeah, and the one thing that I think could evolve there is the offensive lines perhaps start to mesh a little bit better in their run blocking. What you're kind of saying right now, got to be careful with that investment.
Yeah, I definitely would be mindful of running back. I think you want to have a wide variety of running backs because I also think you're going to see some of these young guys start to take over because we saw names like Cameron Artis-Payne, Christine Michael, Andre Williams, guys we thought would be lead dogs in the XFL because of their NFL experience, really were marginalized and didn't play that big of a role down the stretch. Neither of them was the top producer on their team, so I wouldn't put too much investment in them down the stretch. I don't think you're getting rid of them yet in season-long leagues if you have a deep enough bench, but you're definitely not too attached to them.
Okay, so now we're going to cycle through each position and just give us your top 3 like you've been doing, and we'll start with quarterback.
Yeah, so my top 3 for next week, definitely number 1 is going to be Cardell Jones. Cardell Jones has weapons galore around him and weapons that really fit his player profile. He's the kind of guy who wants to take shots deep, move in the pocket, get outside, make things happen. And although he's not going to be the most consistent thrower on a play-to-play basis or drive-to-drive basis, that big play potential and that big physical running style he has is going to keep him at the top of the charts. Jordan Ta'amu is coming up right behind him, 77 yards on the ground. That's a huge floor, and he has the weapons to keep a defense spread out, and if they choose to bring an extra defender in, he's going to take them down with their legs. Lastly, we're going to go with Landry Jones. I'm hoping he's back next week, and if he is back, he gets to play that LA Wildcats defense, which just lost Pepper Johnson and their defensive captain. I don't think that's a move that's going to work for LA. I think Landry Jones is one of the more talented quarterbacks in the XFL, and I think that in a situation like that, Landry Jones is set up to have a field day against Los Angeles this weekend.
Nice. Going back though, Jordan Ta'amu looked fantastic. It was a very defensive game, but at the same time, he made big plays, especially with his feet, but also with his arm. That kid showed a lot of moxie going on the road and getting the win.
Yeah, and that's his first pro start ever. Didn't see a ton of action in the NFL preseason. The fact that he came in, was poised, went up against with a solid Dallas defense and really looked good. Ability to make plays all over the field and use his talent. He really spread the ball around to all his receivers. DeMarne Pearson-El had a solid day. Alonzo Russell had a solid day. His tight end / wide receiver Marcus Lucas had a good day. And, a solid running game also really, really helped him as well because Matt Jones went for 85 yards to pace all running backs. So that was big for him.
Yep. Yeah, and they just slowly wore him down. That was definitely a different style of game than we saw in the Dragons and Defenders, but it was a nice way to close out the week with a real juggernaut.
Yeah, and just in case Landry Jones doesn't go, I'm going to cheat a little bit here. I'm going to give you a fourth. I think Brandon Silvers is also primed for a big week, so all you Seattle fans out there, get excited because I wasn't necessarily impressed with the Tampa defense, and I think Brandon Silvers has potential to have a bounce-back week against a Tampa defense that looks suspect at times against New York.
Who are your top 3 running backs you got?
Top three, I've got James Butler out of Houston. Anybody who's going to get 11 touches in that June Jones offense and be trusted in the red zone to get across, and he's going to get to pick apart the soft underbelly on those inside routes. I'm really looking forward to that. Also, he's going to be going against the St. Louis defense that, although was stingy against Dallas, I definitely think the strength of their team is their secondary, which means James Butler's going to have some opportunities underneath to make plays and really catch and run with the ball. I don't expect a 2-touchdown game from him this week, but I wouldn't be surprised if he goes for one.
Interesting.
Then Davion Smith, I know you're not excited to hear this one because you got to face him this weekend, but he just proved to be the battering ram, the physical runner that he was last year in the AAF, and he had an even bigger load this year, and he looked great on Sunday. It was disappointing that they went down by so much. If it had been a closer game, I would expect Davion Smith to go over 100 yards, and it looks like it's his backfield. Jacques Patrick is just sharing it from time to time.
And then you have a third running back?
Yeah, Matt Jones. Matt Jones is probably in the must-start category right now for running backs. Him and Davion Smith are probably the only ones that I'd say you have to start, because anybody who's going to get 21 carries has to be started. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. And he got targeted one time in the passing game. He's a capable receiver. You know, he could have 25 touches, and if a back is going to get 25 touches, they have to be started, and he could finish the year as RB1 easily.
Yeah. People are familiar with his career. He knows how to get it done, too. He's been there, and he's done that. So he's definitely got that veteran ability to just week in and week out go to work.
For sure. He easily had the best day of any of the NFL backs.
Yeah, he looked good. Okay, well, moving on from running backs, let's go to the wide receivers. Who do you got sitting at the top?
Number one, my favorite player in the XFL right now, Rashad Ross. You know, Rocket Ross. He's just going to get more and more comfortable in that offense. He only had 2 catches on Saturday, but I think him and Cardell are just going to continue to develop a rapport because Rashad Ross can't be overthrown. Cardell Jones can throw that ball 10 yards past any other receiver, and Rashad Ross will just run under it and take it to the house. He's a dynamic, explosive playmaker, and DC's just going to keep looking to get the ball in his hands. Number 2, I'm sure all your Dragons fans are going to be excited about this, Austin Cole.
Yeah.
Easily has to be in the top 3 right now. Got targeted 10 times on Saturday, and I think he's going to bring in a better percentage of them than just the 50% he did, and even with just catching 50%, he still went for 88 yards, you know, the touchdown.
The big touchdown.
So that's just big. 2 touchdowns. I forgot. Yeah, that's just huge. He looks every bit to be a capable receiver. And then lastly, this one might be a little bit of a fringe play, but I'm going to go with Jazz Ferguson here. He was limited this week by injury, but coming back with Landry Jones coming off of injury against that LA Wildcats defense that we talked about, probably is looking to struggle coming up. Jazz Ferguson, a big, fast receiver, somebody who can really take the top off the defense, and if Landry Jones can push the ball down the field, Jazz Ferguson's going to have a huge day for the Renegades.
So pressing on, let's talk about the big receivers, the tight ends. Who's at work there?
Number 1, there's one, and then there's everybody else. You know, Nick Truesdale is it. Nick Truesdale proved on Sunday he is exactly who we thought he was. You know, 3 catches for 49 yards, and New York just had to do a ton to try to take him out of the game. Was targeted 6 times. You really can't pass that up. He was drafted highly, and he is the guy. You know, touchdowns will come. He's going to get targeted the most, and he'll have a big target share week in and week out, one of the biggest of any tight end. Yeah, and then just kind of following up, Donald Parham, you know, was kind of the guy a lot of us thought he could be listed. Been listed anywhere from 6'6" to 6'8", and anyone that big is going to be a threat. He's, again, playing for Dallas against that LA defense that didn't have a great go of it this weekend and might be in some trouble heading into next weekend. And then lastly, he might be a little bit of a cheat, but Marcus Lucas is technically listed on the depth chart in St. Louis as a tight end. He is tight end eligible and listed as a tight end at default on Alt Fantasy. So I think Marcus Lucas at tight end in St. Louis.
Okay, so moving from the tight ends now, let's talk about the flex position and what players are lurking in that area?
Some flex guys who you're not going to start at the running back or wide receiver spot. You're going to want to go Darius Victor, 5'6", bowling ball of knives, to steal a phrase from the big leagues. 5'6", 230, runs viciously and physically. Looks a little bit like Marshawn Lynch out there, honestly, when he runs. Because when he runs, he's putting at least one defender on the ground, if not 2 or 3, and it's going to take a couple guys to bring him down. Had 32 yards last week against Tampa. He just had so many physical runs. It looked like there was more there, and he was the most efficient New York back. I think he sees some more targets, and I think he's going to see some more touches. Similarly, Jacques Patrick down in Tampa. You know, Tampa is blessed to have 2 big physical backs in Davion Smith and Jacques Patrick. Jacques Patrick is going to get some goal line work because of his size. He's about 6'2", runs hard, runs physical, did it at Florida State. Look for him to maybe steal a little bit of goal line work from Davion Smith, and I think he'll be a nice touchdown-dependent flex play. And then lastly, the feel-good story of the XFL, really, Nick Hawley, coming out of a small school where he played quarterback and running back, moved to receiver, 4 catches for 50 yards. He's listed as the 4th receiver in a pass-happy offense with June Jones, and, you know, there's so many talented receivers there on the outside. Nick Hawley's going to face soft coverage, and a smart kid who used to be a quarterback is going to be able to pick that apart. You know, he looked almost, as much as it pains me to say it, Julian Edelman-esque out there at times.
Okay, so, Adam, moving on to the special teams. We got kickers first. How about kickers?
Franks on Tampa Bay is my number 1. Austin McGinnis on Dallas is my number 2. And Russolino on St. Louis is my number 3.
Excellent.
Tampa struggled to get the ball across the goal line. So I think Franks could make a few more kicks. He's a kid with NFL experience. Austin McGinnis in Dallas, again, you know, I think Dallas is going to move the ball up and down the field at will, and there are going to be some drives that stall out, so he's going to make a few kicks. And the same thing with Russolino. Russolino plays for a St. Louis offense that also only scored 1 touchdown on the weekend, but he kicked about, I think it was 3 field goals as well. So I'd be looking for him to show up and kick a few more through as well.
Okay, now how about the defensive side of the ball? Which units hit your top 3?
So number 1 has to be Dallas right now. Dallas, you know, played a hard game against a talented St. Louis team, held them to 15 points, and they're going to get to play LA, which has, to put their quarterback situation mildly, a questionable situation. Some might call it a dumpster fire. I might not go that far, but it did not look good between Knauf and McClendon on Sunday or Saturday, and it does not look like Josh Johnson's going to be back. There's a lot of rumbling that he's not going to be back this week, which has to make Dallas, you know, if you can go get Dallas, go get them now because they're going to put up big points this week. Next, you've got a St. Louis Battlehawks team that just has one of the deepest, most talented secondaries out there. You know, just about, you know, 4 of their 5 starters have NFL experience. And the one who doesn't, Kenny Robinson, has been talked about as being a, you know, top 3-round draft pick when he's eligible for the NFL draft this fall or this spring. And that's just huge against a Houston team that wants to throw the ball. You know, June Jones is going to run out 4 receivers more times than anyone can count. And it's going to be a test for P.J. Walker going against a really strong secondary. And we're going to see. But I like that St. Louis defense to maybe force a turnover or 2. And that's going to be a big difference because I think that if they can force a turnover, one of those might go to the house. I don't think that disqualifies anyone on Houston. I just think St. Louis has the best potential to have a good day for a defense. And then lastly, we got to go with your guys, the Dragons. That Tampa offense, although they put up a ton of yards, I really question their ability to hold on to the ball. Mark Trestman isn't necessarily a coach who inspires a ton of confidence. So I'd be concerned if I'm a Tampa fan, if I'm a Seattle fan or a Seattle defense owner. I'm excited because they're going to have some part of 12 out there, I'm sure, getting loud, getting rowdy, and that can rattle. You know, I mean, we saw Aaron Murray look rattled at times at MetLife, which isn't known for being a great environment. And if he's rattled at MetLife, Lord only knows what's going to happen when he goes into CenturyLink.
So the final question here, I want to know one particular pick. Who's your super sleeper?
You know, it's got to be Quentin Flowers right now. He's just a guy who looked to be the key to unlocking that Tampa offense last week. when they looked their most explosive, Quentin Flowers was on the field. Whether he was getting the ball in a jet sweep, whether he was the quarterback setting up a read option, he seemed to be the straw that stirred the drink. If Mark Trestman is the guru people claim he is going to look for Flowers to have the ball in his hands more. Mm-hmm. Whether that's running, whether that's throwing the ball, he's one of my prime candidates to be the first one to throw a double pass. And I think that he's somebody who you need to go lock in. You might even try to talk your commissioner into making him running back or wide receiver eligible like we did in the Expert League, because he is listed as a QB/running back on the XFL site. So if you can get him, plug him into your running back slot, you could get a guy who's going to take a dozen snaps at quarterback and throw 4 or 5 passes, and throwing 4 or 5 passes on which he's probably going to connect on over 50%. And usually going to be a big play. That's a huge steal in value that you can get, and he's going to be available in a lot of leagues right now.
Could you tell our listeners, Adam, how they can follow you on social media and the web?
Yeah, so if you're checking me out on social media, most active on Twitter, at Adam Pelletier. You can also find my articles a couple times a week over on sportsgamblingpodcast.com. Do a weekly waiver wire, weekly rankings, and maybe a few other things as well related to XFL Fantasy.
All right. Thank you so much, Adam, for coming on to the podcast, and we look forward to talking to you down the road, and enjoy week 2.
Sounds good. You as well. Have a good one.
Our next fantasy football prognosticator is Anthony Miller. He is a credentialed XFL reporter that contributes a lot of great content. He's here with another take on XFL Fantasy. How are you doing tonight, Anthony?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on the show. I appreciate it.
Well, I want to jump right into it and have you give us your top overall fantasy winners of the week, a top 3.
Yeah, so it's hard to pick a top 3, but I would definitely say on that list, one of them has to be P.J. Walker. He was just so impressive in that game against the LA Wildcats. You know, the 4 touchdowns he threw, and even just his running ability. I mean, I felt like he could have ran for more yards if he would have just taken it, but, you know, his arm is so good and he's so accurate with those deep balls that he trusted himself a lot more to throw those balls into the end zone. So I was really impressed with how P.J. played. I think he's probably going to end up being one of the top quarterbacks in the league and definitely one of the top ones in fantasy. I think he's going to end up producing a lot of points just because of what he can do with his legs. Another fantasy guy that I was really impressed with was Nelson Spruce, which I'm not surprised about. He was fantastic when he played with the Fleet last year in the Alliance, and he showed it again, this weekend. 11 catches, 103 yards. I mean, he's just a dude that, he's not the fastest guy, but he's probably got the most reliable hands in the league. He's going to go in there and he's going to make every catch. And when you need a to convert on a third down, he's the guy you're going to probably look for to make a big catch to move the chain. So. And then probably the biggest fantasy impact was probably Jordan Ta'amu. I mean, the way he played against the Renegades, I was able to go to that game and watch it live. Ta'amu is just so smooth in that pocket. It kind of took him a while to get comfortable with the game, but I think he started trusting himself more with some of those passes. Mm-hmm. He started throwing it deeper, and his legs, I mean, he's able to bust off. I know he busted off like a 30-something yard run on Dallas that set up a touchdown pass for him. So that's going to be something to watch in fantasy all year. I'm sure he's going to be putting up plenty of points when running on the ground and throwing through the air.
Okay, so let's go on the lower end. How about some of the players that fell well below the mark? Who are your 3 losers of the week?
I think the 3 losers of the week, I would say one of them is probably Andre Williams with the Roughnecks. I don't think anyone could have expected him to get 2 carries for 0 yards. Little did we know James Butler would end up being, the bright spot to the Roughnecks, running game. Mm-hmm. So anyone who's an Andre Williams, fantasy owner had to have been so disappointed in him because honestly, it looked like at times that Andre Williams just didn't fit with that offense. He just kind of looked out of sync. Like, it looked like James Butler is a better fit. I think they need more of a versatile back there for the Houston Roughnecks. So that was kind of interesting to kind of see how that turned out. Secondly, Aaron Murray. I mean, this guy probably performed the worst of the quarterbacks this week. Last year we saw it in the alliance with the Atlanta legend. He really struggled to, really produce much. He turned the ball over a lot. But in his defense, there just wasn't a lot of weapons for him in Atlanta. This year, to me, it just feels kind of similar. Outside of Nick Truesdale, I just don't know if they have much at receiver to support him as much as he needs it. So, losing Antonio Callaway and cutting Stacey Cooley, I think really affected their passing game. So Murray never really looked comfortable. He, turned the ball over twice. It was a really ugly game from him. So that was disappointing to see that. And then the last one, any Christian Michael fan, same thing with Andre Williams. I mean, he had 7 carries and didn't gain a single yard. Yeah. He really struggled against the running game when Matt Jones went off for 85 yards. So it was really weird to see how Christian Michael struggled, and he also fumbled in the game too. So he basically lost his job in the middle of the game to someone like Matt Jones, who played phenomenally against Dallas. Mm-hmm. So I'd be really interested to see how that running back position is going to go for St. Louis, because I think Matt Jones and Keith Ford kind of put themselves out there as the top 2, and Michael kind of looked like he took a step back.
Okay, so now let's cycle through each position. Once again, your top 3 per, and we'll start with your quarterbacks.
Well, I think P.J. Walker definitely has got to be up there as one of the top quarterbacks. He's about to go up against the St. Louis Battlehawks defense. Their secondary is pretty good, but they did allow a lot of short completions, and P.J. Walker might be able to take advantage of that. Also St. Louis faced a quarterback in Philip Nelson that maybe isn't as mobile. I can see Walker having a big game. St. Louis, while they won the game against Dallas, it never really seemed as impressive as the final score showed. So I think P.J. Walker could be poised for another big game. Secondly, I would go Jordan Ta'amu again. I felt like, Houston's defense in the second half played phenomenally, but they faced off against Charles Knuff. He's not exactly the top-notch quarterback of the league. He's a backup quarterback for a reason. So I think that's going to be a nice another challenge there with trying to face up against a mobile quarterback like Jordan Ta'amu. So that's going to be a fun game. I think we're looking at 2 of the best young quarterbacks in the league facing off against each other. Mm-hmm. So that'll be good to see. And then number 3, I'm going to throw in Landry Jones. I'm sure it seems like he's going to play this weekend, so I'm going to say that he's probably going to be one of the top quarterbacks. Dallas was really conservative with their passing game on Sunday, but I can see them kind of open up the offense a little bit with Landry and let him bomb it deep. So I expect good fantasy points coming out of Landry Jones and put up big yards.
Nice. Yeah, and I'm really excited for that St. Louis-Houston game. That's a pretty exciting matchup. So now let's shift into the running back role. Who are your top 3 running backs?
I think we're looking at a couple of them just in the Seattle and Tampa Bay game alone. I mean, Devon Smith had one of the top games of the week, when he was able to produce, about 79 yards rushing against New York's defense, which it's widely considered as one of the top defenses in the league.
Yeah, so, they look good.
Devon Smith is just a great talent, so I wouldn't be surprised if he puts up a big performance this weekend as well. I would say number 2, probably in that same game, I love Jaquan Gardner. He was one of the top running backs in the Alliance last year. Just the way he's built like Maurice Jones-Drew. He's got good speed. He's got a potential to break away. Last week it was kind of a run by committee with a Farrell there and Williams. So that's probably what the Dragons are going to be doing all year. But Gardner's got that big play ability, and he's got the potential to do that against a Tampa Bay defense that really struggled. They did better against the run than they did against Matt McGloin's passing game. Mm-hmm. But I do feel like that Seattle's running game, they probably have the best combination of the 3 in the XFL. So I can see Gardner pulling off a big one. Nice. And then for my 3rd one, I would say Elijah Hood with the Wildcats. Yeah. They're going up against the Dallas defense that just allowed almost 200 yards of rushing total offense to the St. Louis Battlehawks. So I can see Hood having a big game. I don't know how well the Renegades are going to be able to stop that run. I guess it's more of a let's just see and prove it. Josh Johnson might be coming back. It sounds like he may not, so it looks like they may be going with another backup quarterback. So LA might be trusting that run a lot more. I wouldn't be surprised if Elijah Hood is able to put up a good game.
Okay, so now wide receivers. Who do you got sitting at the top of your wide receivers?
Yeah, Nelson Spruce definitely has to be on the top of that list. He's just the most reliable receiver for the Wildcats. I think whoever the quarterback is, no matter what, he's going to be their top target. So I would not be surprised if he's able to put up big numbers against the Renegades defense. So again, I think he's always going to be a safe fantasy choice, no doubt. I think Mikael McKay has got to be another one for the Guardians. He was so good with the San Antonio Commanders last year. He had a big 45-yard catch with the Guardians this past weekend. Mm-hmm. And I think, while Matt McGloin is kind of just trying to get his feet wet with it, maybe wasn't as accurate as we would have hoped, I think McKay can still be a top target for him. And this might be the game where McGloin finally gets comfortable and maybe starts letting it loose a little bit. So I can see him having a big game there. My last one would be Rashard Ross. He's one of my favorite receivers in this league. I just think he's a deep threat potential. I think, last week it didn't seem like he played as much for DC, and I think that's just because he needs to learn the offense. He's only been on the team for, 2-3 weeks? Mm-hmm. So he needs to kind of learn that offense a little more, but it seemed to be a little more comfortable. He was able to make a big catch for 31 yards in that game, so I think we'll see more of that this weekend.
So let's transfer that into the flex position. What variety of players do you have sitting on your top 3 at the flex?
So at the flex position, I would say James Butler, I think now has to be considered as somebody to potentially start for the Roughnecks. As I mentioned before, Andre Williams just never felt like a fit in that offense. He just looked really uncomfortable and awkward, where James Butler seems to be the perfect fit just because of how that offense is run. They're going to do a lot of passing, and they need a running back that's going to be able to make some plays out of the backfield. So I really like how James Butler plays, so I would consider him in the flex. Kenneth Farrell was one of my favorite Alliance players last year. He is always going to be able to get those tough, 4 or 5 yards for you. Yeah. So he had a good game last week against DC. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see him kind of perform well again. And then Eli Rogers had a good game last week. I mean, you got to think about what he went through with, his mother passing away in the middle of the week, and he still was able to put up 6 catches for 73 yards. So he seemed to be Cardell Jones' favorite target, and I can see Cardell going to him more.
Okay, now let's talk about the special teams. Who do you got sitting atop your kickers list?
Yeah, so I like Ty Rosa, the kicker for the DC Defenders. I know he missed like a short 35-yard field goal during the game against Seattle, but he did knock in a 50-plus yarder before halftime of that game. So I think he's got a nice leg to him, and I think he's going to be a big factor all season because I just think DC's offense is doing well. They seem to be clicking, but, there's going to be times where they're going to fall short of the end zone. I think he's going to be a reliable kicker to go to for sure. Mm-hmm. For LA, I like Nick Novak just because I just like the veteran presence that he brings. He's, kicked in the NFL for so long. So he's a reliable kicker. And with LA's offense, just kind of inconsistent right now. We don't really know their identity. We don't know how good they're going to be. We don't know when Josh Johnson's coming back. So, they're probably going to have a lot of drives that are going to stall out. So they're going to need Nick Novak to kind of step up and make those kicks. The last one I like is Austin McGinnis. He had a big game last week. He went 3 for 3. He basically was Dallas's whole offense. With Landry kind of slowly getting back into the offense, I can see the first couple quarters, maybe Austin knocking in a couple field goals just until Landry gets comfortable with getting back into that lineup. So I can see him making another big fantasy impact for Dallas.
Okay, so let's go to the defensive units now. Who's your top 3 defenses?
I would definitely say the Dallas Renegades, just because, again, I don't know where LA's offense is. They're all over the place. As long as the Renegades secondary can cover Nelson Spruce and be able to shut down the running game with Elijah Hood leading the way, then I can see Dallas, putting up some fantasy numbers and being able to get some turnovers in that game. So I like Dallas for that. In terms of other defense, I think Seattle's defense, Tampa basically proved that, if I guess all you really need to do is stop the run and put some pressure on Aaron Murray and create some turnovers, and Tampa's offense is going to fall apart. They were able to only produce 3 points. Seattle's looking for a bounce-back game. I know they're probably disappointed that they lost that DC game, so they got an opportunity to bounce back big time, and it's going to be a better team to bounce back with than Tampa. My third one is probably the DC defenders. New York's offense was pretty good against Tampa, but they were kind of inconsistent in their passing game. DC, I just felt like was the most complete team of the week. They were able to win that game in all three phases of the game with, scoring a touchdown on offense, defense, and special teams. Yeah. So I can see that defense stepping up again and making some plays against New York. So, we're not really sure what New York's offense is just because they didn't run the ball that well, and Matt LaFleur was kind of inconsistent. So DC's defense could put up some points.
Okay, now for the final fantasy question, who's your super sleeper pick for week 2?
My sleeper pick for this week, this has been tough. I've been thinking a lot about it. I would probably say Brandon Silvers. I think a lot of people weren't really high on him in terms of how he played against DC. But I thought he didn't play that bad. I think the second half kind of got away from Seattle a little bit. But they're about to play Tampa Bay. And I know there's some better quarterbacks out there. But this is the perfect opportunity for Brandon Silvers to gain that confidence and, hit it up big time with some big numbers between guys like, Austin Proehl and Evan Rodriguez. So this could end up being a big week for Brandon Silvers, and it could gain him some confidence going into the rest of the season.
Yeah, I'd happen to agree with that, too. I think that he's going to have a chance to make adjustments in front of a home crowd. That was a pretty impressive environment in D.C., and just certain plays got away from him and got away from the team. But, no, I'll take that. I think there's some bright stuff coming for Silvers here down the road. I just want to thank you now for hopping on to the Sea of Dragons podcast. And can you tell our listeners how to follow all of your XFL work?
Yeah, so you can follow me on Twitter at AntMill40. I do a lot of great work with XFLboard.com, and I've been doing work with Overtime Heroics, in terms of covering the XFL. So you can go check those sites out. I usually post my stories and post other stories from those sites as well. So be sure to engage with me on XFL Talk. I love talking about XFL football. So I'm really excited for anyone that wants to reach out. I'm more than happy to engage in conversation.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Anthony, and we'll talk to you down the road.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So there's some helpful XFL fantasy insights. And be sure to give both Adam and Anthony a follow on social media. They both produce a lot of great content, and they're only going to get stronger as the 2020 season continues. And now it's time to start getting ready for the Dragons home opener. And I'm not only excited, but I'm also very optimistic. It's time to journey to CenturyLink Field and watch our Seattle Dragons for the very first time. It's time to breathe fire. Thank you for listening to Sea of Dragons, XFL Endzone 2020.